Hey everyone, this is Dr. Maples. We're here with our last observation lecture. Now we're going to talk about analyzing these field notes that you've already taken. I'm going to tell you your first step is to go ahead and type up those field notes. If they're handwritten, typing them up will give you a chance to clean up your abbreviations, your misspellings, and so forth. Likewise, if you typed them up, making a new copy where you copy and paste the old one will give you a chance to clean those things up and make them look neater. Always save copies of your old observation. Your original observation notes should always be saved. Reason why is that you may need to go back to those at some point. It's uncommon, in fact, it's really rare, but you may need to nonetheless. So always keep a clean copy of those old ones. There's a temptation when you type your notes to just sort of retype those same ones, but don't do that. Save them as your original observation notes, and then say that these are the revised, cleaned up notes. Now, as you're cleaning these up, you do have the opportunity to sort of append things to what you wrote. You can go in and add descriptives that maybe you didn't quite flesh out, but you remember clearly. You could even add in analytical notes as you go about maybe some potential codes that come to mind or reasons why people are doing things that you might be studying. When you do this, use a symbol to note that you did that. A pound symbol is a really good way to do that, because if you note a pound symbol and then anything after it, you'll know that this is something that's not in your original notes, but it's something that you added. I like the idea of revising your notes as you go. I think it's valuable, but make a point of recording that it was a revision. Once you've typed up your observations, you now are effectively going to do the same thing that you did with the interviews. You're going to go through and do a round of open coding. You're going to go through them and look for things that stand out to you as codes. Your hypotheses will likely give you some ideas about the things that you would want to code. And similarly, the variables that you'll be thinking about for your hypothesis will also pop up as things that you probably want to code. It's also cool too, because here you get a chance to kind of really start thinking about what these mean. If you have multiple observations, you can code them the same way that you would multiple interviews. But one of the cool things about observations is you often observe numerous people at the same observation site at the same observation. And when that happens, when you're creating your table, much like you did for the interview assignment, when you create that table, instead of having interview 1, interview 2, interview 3, you could actually put person 1, person 2, person 3, or the names that you assign to them, or the symbols, or however you choose to clarify that. But you could have an opportunity to apply multiple codes to multiple people that way. Grounded theory is something that comes up a lot here. And I like to think about that because for your analysis, what you're doing is you're kind of starting with the basics of providing a description of the place and time and so forth. And then you build on that by adding the people. Now that you're getting into the coding, especially as you go into that focused coding round, you have an opportunity to start developing a true explanation for why things are happening. Your analytical notes along the way may also help with that. But this is the whole purpose of grounded theory. We're trying to build things from the ground up so that we can understand really what's going on in the scheme of things. That's basically it for analyzing observations. You do this the same way that you would approach the interviews. You use a round of open coding where you go through and apply your codes, then you go back and make a table of those, and you decide which ones might need to be expanded or collapsed, and then you code your interview a second time. That second list of codes gives you an opportunity to start looking for common patterns, reasons, and more as you think about grounded theory. How many observations are enough? The question has no answer. If you have the resources and time to do an extra observation, that's great. If you have an observation that ends up being just a bad luck one where no one shows up, you'll probably be stuck doing another one. But it's the same thing as like how long is long enough. There's no answer. If you have the resources to do more, you can. But notice that on the previous slide, I mentioned the idea that you may have observed multiple people doing the thing that you're wanting to study. For example, if I were studying those, how perceptions of race might shape how people treat food workers in a food court, I could probably observe 50 people in an hour or even 30 minutes if I caught it in the right sort of timing and place. And so I've got multiple people that I can code within my notes, whereas with interviews, each of those people would have been one interview. So you might be able to knock it out in one observation, but you do what you're able to do with the resources that you have. One of the most important things that I think is to remember is just go out there and do these things. If you have the time to do more, that's great, but don't let your time resources hold you back from doing a study. It's better to go ahead and get on the bus and just do the work. And then if you can do more of it, that's great, but you do with what you can with what you have. That wraps up how we work with observations. You'll start to notice that observations are very similar to interviews in some ways. And in fact, in our last assignment, we're going to find out about content analysis, which also has some overlapping here. But for those interested in observations, my people watchers from the get-go who are saying, I want to do one of these, well, good news for you. You can, in fact, do one of these as part of your assignments. Remember, we have an assignment where all students pick 2 of 4 methods provided, and they choose small assignments such as building a survey or designing an interview guide or doing some short interviews as part of that. That can build up an assignment that gives you a chance to practice developing research questions, sociological research questions at that, developing hypotheses, and working with variables. Well, it's the same thing for this one. That assignment is actually on Blackboard. Now remember, you choose 2 of the 4, so you could choose interviews and observations, or surveys and interviews, or surveys and observations. And we're going to have a 4th one coming up in our next lecture series, which is content analysis. Now, I'm probably going to see a common pattern where a lot of people do surveys and interviews together because they're kind of similar, or a lot of people doing interviews and observations together because they're similar. Same thing with the content analysis. It won't surprise me if I see a lot of people doing observations and content analysis. The first 2 are very engaged, where people are sort of part of the process, and for some people that makes them uncomfortable. It's okay to be less excited about having to ask people to fill out surveys and things like that. I totally understand that, believe me. But the cool thing is these last 2, observations and the one coming up, content analysis, give you a chance to truly stand back and just watch and not interact with anyone. So if you feel more comfortable with that, those are a great fit for you. But that wraps up our conversations about observations. That assignment is on Blackboard. If you have questions about that, about the assignment as a whole, if you have questions about observations, I'm here to answer them. That's my job. Likewise, take care of yourself when you're doing observations. Presently, I'm recording this during a pandemic, but always make sure when you do observations that you put your personal safety first and foremost. Any observation you might get is not worth any amount of harm, even a parking ticket. Make sure that your observations don't put you in risk. And likewise, based on a past scenario with another student, let me say that as an undergraduate student, you really should stick to the non-partition observations. You're not ready to do ethnographies. That's something where you need to work with a faculty member and get advanced training in doing that. So don't be that student that's going to go out and try and do this amazing breaching experiment or ethnographic study. Please, please, please keep them sweet and simple and do these non-obtrusive observations. So focus on those instead of trying to do something bigger. When you're in graduate school, you can go completely crazy on that and do whatever you want. But for me, I'm only looking at these non-obtrusive observations. All right, that's it. We're done for now. In our next lecture, we'll talk about content analysis, and I think you're going to love that one. If you got questions about anything, you know where to find me. Otherwise, I'll see you in our next lecture. Take care.